Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. This is episode number 21, and I'm going to talk about where did that come from? That's my topic. Where did that come from? Have you had the occasion to when you have a relationship and you're talking with someone, or maybe you've had that upset? And I talked about upsets in episode 20. But here's the thing. And they say, well, we have nothing in common. And I'll tell you what. That will hit you like a ton of bricks. Because the question is that really the fact, or are they just upset with you and feel frustrated that the communication is broken down? And I can imagine that if someone had said something like that to me, especially when you think things are going along, you may not have you're not aware that they're upset at something, and then you get that message. You know, whether it's a phone call or whether it just comes out of the blue in a conversation. We have nothing in common. Well, that, for a lot of people, is a conversation stopper, because it almost sounds like that the person that's making the statement, they're not going to do anything else to try to make this work. And if you're invested, if you feel any love for that person, obviously you want it to work. You want to have a better communication than that, but you get stopped by something as like I say, that's a pretty strong thing to have someone say to you. So what do? Well, the first thing you do is you try to find out, obviously, this is not a joke. This is something that someone is saying because they're upset, or maybe they're not demonstrably upset, but they're unhappy. Well, you're going to want to find out what's the issue, what happened. And if it's something you said or some sort of behavior that you exhibited, then obviously, they're sharing their feelings. If you remember anything of it, well, you certainly should take ownership of it. But you need to take stock in the fact that they're telling you something, and there's information that you need to get. So you need to ask them about what's went on, what's upset them, and try to do damage control. And by that, I don't mean make up stories, but I mean really be honest about whatever it was that happened. And if you said it in a way that was unnice or unkind, let me say that's more clear. If you said it in a way that's unkind, then maybe it's helpful to restate it. But don't just stay there and try to retell your story. What you need to do is you need to be in the place of understanding the other person who's upset at you and try to mend the fence, as I say. And doing damage control or mending the fence, which, pick your expression, is about being a good listener. It's about wanting to make a difference, because you might have information that this has been probably going on for a while when you think about it, and you just didn't act. And certainly this is a pretty important time to act. To be cause in the matter is what I like to say, and try to make a difference here, because someone's feelings are at stake. And if you leave it in this fractured place too long, you may not have a relationship to come back to, and you'll be saying goodbye. So when somebody says you don't have anything in common, the first reaction is it's that they have forgotten the things that probably mean a lot to both of you. And what is just glaring in front of them is what they're angry about. And as I shared a bit ago, you need to ask questions. What is that? What happened? And get them to tell you their side of the story, and then try to address it. And repairing this has to do with being in the place of, like I said, being a good listener, understanding that you do have feelings. So if there was something that you said and maybe you should have said it differently, you can state it differently. But if you have a gripe, maybe bringing it up now isn't the time, but you can revisit things a little bit later. But you're there for your partner, and that's a real important distinction. Some people don't have the mindset to think about that at this time. They figure if somebody brings something to them to deal with, then they immediately want to fight back. When what you really should be doing is being a good listener. And that takes lots of practice, because that's not necessarily an instinctive thing to do. The instinctive thing to do is the fight or flight, which is to react to someone coming to you rather than being a listener. So when you can master those kinds of skills, you have great relationship potential. And you're probably one of the few who can deal with conflict in a healthy way. I know we've all had things that have happened to us, and we probably wish we'd handled them better. And hopefully we have seen examples of people that really do a good job of handling conflict, whether they are being maybe verbally attacked in a way that can be sounds like is very mean-spirited, and not in the deflecting, but actually being able to deal and work through those situations. I mean, I have certainly seen people do it much better than I do, and I admire those people that have that skill. I'm still working on it, but I think it's. But suffice it to say that being a good listener is one of the tools to have, and doing what I call damage control has a lot to do with understanding that when somebody brings something like that to you, that you actually do have a part in it. That people don't just get upset for no reason. I think oftentimes what happens is because the way a person brings the message to us, we want to discount them as having any validity. So example, if they say it in a really mean way back to us, we kind of think, oh, well, they have no purpose to say it to us mean, so I don't have to listen to them. Well, that's an approach. But I don't think that solves the problem. That just tends to exacerbate it. And if it's a problem with somebody you love, then you are going to be even more on the outs and going to wish you handled it differently after you cool off. So think about it that way. So to finish, you basically talk about the things that you have to work on, the things you have in common, and what you value in that person. And I think you can have a better outcome. But if the person is just determined to, say, want to make a transition, want to make a break, then you may have to be in the place of acceptance on that. That's not going to be easy, but everyone has the choice, free will. When you're in a relationship, you are free to be there. And if you don't want the relationship, you are free to leave. But we are volunteers when we come together. And that's part of what you take on when you're in a relationship. I'm going to transition to something a little bit different, and it is to talk about affection. What is affection to you? How much is appropriate? And, well, we're going to talk about that when we come back after this break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
In the last segment, I had ended with the idea of we're going to talk about what is affection and what it is to you. I think we all have probably some idea of what it feels like. Some people know exactly what it is to describe it, but I'm going to talk about it. Affection is a gesture that conveys some sort of emotion, some sort of amount of attachment. And with affection, it could be hand-holding, it could be a kiss, it could be sexual in nature, it could be non-sexual. There's platonic relationships, which we tend to mean is something that's non-sexual. But there are certainly those relationships. Men have them together, women have them with men, and all over the board in terms of all the different combinations of relationships that we can have. And by affection, we relate that to the amount of attachment we have. And it goes to reason to want to understand with your partner or whomever we're talking about the relationships with. When I say partner, I'm generally talking about romantic partners, somebody who's invested in that way. But again, this applies to all relationships across the board. That whether it's giving a piece of jewelry or hand-holding, whether it's sexual intercourse, however that is, again, affection is what we do to show a connection. And if you're mismatched in terms of how you get affection, how you want to receive it, how you want to give it, it's about trying to find a common ground. Because we have all sorts of reasons why people change. As when people are first in a relationship, the honeymoon phase, as we like to call it, the affection, there's a lot of attachment. There's a lot of hand-holding, and I'm talking about romantic partners now. There's a lot of connection, a lot of communication, it could be very physical. And as the relationship progresses, sometimes affection is shown in different ways. Sometimes it's a glance. It could be gifts. It could be jewelry, like I shared. It could be flowers. It could be doing something for someone else. In one of my other podcasts, I talked about languages of love, and this certainly applies. To understand that really helps. Languages of love, and when you share that with someone, you want that to leave an imprint upon them and say that this is who I am because you're representing yourself. If you have a mismatch, you're a person that really likes touchy-feely and you have a partner that is not doing that, I think one of the first things that comes to my mind is, how did the relationship originally start out? Was there a lot of physicality to it, or was it not that? Because if there was, and there's been a shift, then it may indicate something has changed in terms of the other person, or it may be that, again, people change in their own ways just because of where they are. And I'm gonna give you an extreme. When you're a young couple, as I started to say, when you're a couple that first starts out, you're very affectionate. Later on down the line, that way of showing affection may have played out for you, and you may not have thought of anything new, but you're not going to always do the old thing that you did when you first started out in the relationship. So it's one of those things where keeping a relationship fresh is very important. You got to think of new ways. For some people, that's a lot of work. Some people are not very original, not very creative. Then you're going to have to work on that. But that might explain it. So this isn't to say that somebody has lost feeling for you. It's just they may have lost their creative ability to come up with something new. And addressing that might give it an opportunity to have a respark, or you can reset and progress. But if you're in a situation, and this is what I started to propose, if you're in a situation and you're mismatched, what do you do about that? I'm going to do the standard thing is you're going to have to bring it up. You're going to have to address it. But by addressing it, we're talking about it and trying to understand that there could be a lot of reasons why the mismatch. And one of the first things I said, it doesn't mean that they love you less. It just means that maybe they're operating different. Maybe they're stressed about something. Maybe they're distracted. Or maybe they're just not aware. And by being the catalyst, maybe what you have to do is you have to tell them what you want. And I think in most cases, you can get a buy-in. You can get them to understand you and want to give you what it is you need. Because that's that's the beauty of having a relationship, having a steady partner, is you can sort of rely on that aspect. And, relationships in and of themselves, they're roller coaster rides. And not everything is smooth as a brand new highway. There are peaks and valleys. And understanding that there's also going to be the peaks and valleys of affection in a relationship, and being able to weather the storm is what also gives the relationship endurance. It gives it maturity, as they say. Because I don't know of any long-term relationship that didn't have bumps in the road. And it's being able to share that experience and come through it is also very bonding. But it's also important to remember that you're pulling the same direction, or one can push and the other can pull, but as long as you're going the same direction, you'll be all right. I think it's important to master the idea that you are not a victim, because the minute you bring victim status to a problem, you are at a decided disadvantage. Because what this is going to seem like, it's going to seem like it's a gripe session and that you're going to whine. And one of the hardest things to do is to make your point by being a whiner. You can do it that way, but in terms of getting what you want, the person on the other end is just going to inside, they're going to just roll their eyes, and you're not going to have very good luck with that. Some people will do something just to shut you up, but that's all you get. What you ideally want is not only for them to buy in, but for them to also take initiative. And being a whiner doesn't usually tend to get that. That usually tends to get you the minimum. That's like the boss yelling at you. Okay, you don't want to take any more risks when the boss yells at you. You'll just give them exactly what they want, and you won't even put yourself out there because you don't want to get your head bit off. Well, whiners, they're just the opposite in terms of, they're not biting your head off, but basically you just want to shut them up. So you just give them the minimum. And that's what happens. So when you approach these kinds of things, and affection is a big one, because there's a lot at risk here when we're talking about the affection between two people. We're talking about something that most human beings need. Is they need affection and attention. They want to feel loved. They want to feel like they're important. And affection is one of those tools in which we do that. Because this is not just about mere survival. This isn't about I have to eat every day. This is something on top of that. And this is something someone gets because they get favor, you see. So you don't just tend to give affection to just any and everyone out there in the world. You're very selective. And by that, you're special. And that's what affection is supposed to show. That's what we get. And again, there's affection lots of different ways. There's giving jewelry. There's the spending of the time. There's doing special favors for words. All of these are ways in which we show affection. And by giving that and receiving that, it's important to, if you're the receiver on that, to acknowledge this. And when it's mismatched, it's bringing it to the surface, figuring out also what's missing for you and communicating that to your partner. Remember, don't whine. When you whine, people hate that. They're just going to want you to just stop whining. And I think you can get what you want. It's about people skills and about communicating with people. Asking, ye shall receive. Here's another something I want to think about. This could be pretty serious for some people because we have people who are very altruistic, meaning they like to do things for the benefit of doing them because it makes them feel good. Something that happens quite often is you get faced, not just altruistic people, but taking on somebody else's problem. And by that, what I'm describing to you is you get a person who just seems to have something that's happening, some woeful thing that is happening, and they bring it to you. And, okay, what do? I believe that you can try to steer them in the right direction, but taking on that problem for them is probably not beneficial to that person. Because what we're trying to get at here is help people to become independent. Some people have problems because they have not dealt with the problems, and it just keeps following them along, and they keep looking for the next person to take it on for them. And I think you as an individual have to look at how the person got in the situation and taking it from them to fix it does not solve the problem. You can, in many cases, get yourself trapped, caught up in being forever in the position of having to fix this. And you are forever caught in this cycle of fixing their problem. And that is a hard thing to let go of, because when you try to kick this thing away, now they've got their hooks in you. So problem solving in and of itself can be a challenge. You have to understand what it is you're working on, for one thing. And when you're working on somebody else's problem, you probably don't know all the facts surrounding it. You just know whatever bits and pieces that they've laid on you, and you think this can be a little simple thing, and these things can really tend to mushroom. It's not that it isn't it's not insensitive to be thoughtful about what can you really do for another person. I mean, you should pause and reflect on how it's going to impact you. And certainly wanting to help another human being is a wonderful thing. But there's help, and then there's handouts. And when you continue to invest in someone else's problem, that probably is, like I said, one of your codependency issues, rather than helping them solve it. Because what you want to have a person do is learn from their own experience, because that's what life is here to teach you, is to learn from your experience. And if you're feeling that you're being needy and having to have somebody to do those kinds of things for, you have to be looking in the mirror. You've got something to work on yourself, and you need to work on yourself rather than someone else's problems. Let me invite you to see it that way, and you'll be much better off, because then when you finally look back and see what you've been doing, you'll be better off when you can solve your own deal. Now, let me give you a little background on my experience in that. I was a person who very much loved to be around people and loved to talk about things. And I have my own ideas about how to solve problems. I've been a person who's had to solve a lot of his own. And I get asked a question or two. And I tend to take on things because I like to learn from the experience that I've had. But it tend to be an endless loop. And that I would get tied into these things and couldn't find a way out, couldn't find an exit. And it's like me being the pony that's running around the edge of the corral, and that person just staying in the middle watching me do all the work. You see, that's the kind of mess that you can get yourself tied into when you don't see this from afar and learn. Because it's unfortunate that it's hard to get out of it once it starts. It's easier in the very beginning to make a decision about what you're going to do, what you can do, and because once you're involved, you almost become responsible for the whole deal. And that's the thing. And then you don't want to be the one that drops the ball, because you have no idea what the ramifications of that could be. So that's the reason why you need to be proactive in asking the questions up front, knowing how far you want to get involved in things, and be okay with saying no. It's also one of my other podcasts, being able to say no. Give yourself that gift, and you will live a much more happy and fruitful life. And you'll be a good example for yourself and those who are dependent upon you. I'm going to take a short break, and I'll be right back after this.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Well, hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. This is episode 21, and this started out by talking about where did that come from. And I'm going to close by talking about a subject of long-distance relationships. Now, long-distance relationships are those in which people, they could live in a town, a couple of towns apart. They can live on the other side of the country. And it's the viability of such a relationship, I'm going to talk a little bit about it this time, and maybe I'll talk about it some more on another podcast. The viability of these relationships really depends on the individuals. And because there's a lot of things that won't happen in the time frame with which when you get to be around somebody, let's say you live in the same town. Across town, you can meet for dinners whenever you want to. You can tend to go to the movies on weekends or whatever day you pick. You tend to have that access, that availability. But when people live a distance apart, now you have challenges. And if you've never been in that kind of relationship, well, it's obviously going to be a brand new experience. Usually what you get is when you meet that person, you have this romantic pull, and that tends to last, that tug, those warm feelings tend to last for quite a while, because this is something that's working in your head, and until you meet the next person, and then you fill in the blanks. So that sort of takes the relationship and it stretches it out, because it's not something that can happen on a daily basis, such as being able to see them. You can probably talk to them on the phone, or nowadays you can Skype, or which gives you the visual, or you can text message them, you can email them. So you do have that contact. But I'm talking about that physical proximity, and that's the significance about talking about a long distance relationship. And some people do well with that. Some people are very okay with that, because they're not necessarily needing to see the person or be in the physical place day in and day out. And if you're that kind of person, then a long-distance relationship may work for you. And to understand that sometimes in the nature of these things, it could be temporary that it's a long-distance thing. If you have a significant other that travels a lot for their job, or has the potential to maybe relocate, so that the promise of having more proximity is the likelihood, then a long-distance relationship may not be such a stretch, because you have the idea that this thing is going to transition to something else. But you have to understand that up front, because if that's not something that you see that's likely to happen, then understand a long-distance relationship is going to have a different set of problems. And two very independent individuals could probably work that. And there's all sorts of agreements and things that get set in place. And there's some things that are implied. And probably it's through your lifestyle that you've seen this kind of thing, and it may be your temperament. But this is sort of for the individual that has never experienced that. What is that going to be like? What are you going to do with that relationship when it has that time and that distance from reconnecting in the physical realm? That you have all of these other ways of connecting, but you want to be with that person. Well, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. And just to say it, a lot of relationships don't survive because they don't have the physical, the two people don't have the physical proximity, and it causes a great deal of strain. And when we hear the actors struggle with this all the time, because they could be busy, they're on location, they're doing shoots, and if both of them are very busy individuals, the not having the physical proximity to each other causes a great strain on the relationship. And all sorts of surrogates come into play. Surrogate meaning somebody that substitutes for you, surrogate girlfriends, surrogate boyfriends, and that gets really messy. But in the place of someone who's never experienced that, and then trying to have that experience, you just can't wish that to happen. I mean, the people have to. There has to be an adjustment. They either have to figure out how they're going to be together and live in the same town, or at least be closer, maybe a community apart. But the long distance relationship isn't for everyone. There are full of pitfalls, and it takes maturity to be able to live through something like that, and or to grow through some of the problems that happen. Because if you're not a good problem solver, then a long distance relationship isn't going to necessarily turn into a long relationship. Yeah, the long distance part probably makes it easier for you to not deal with things. And that means you sweep things under the rug until the next time they come around. And some people love the idea of that, because the thing that happens in that experience is they don't really deal with problems. They wind up staying in that honeymoon phase for longer and longer and longer periods of time. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's part of the problem itself is that when you then get smacked with reality, now it's like, okay, what are we going to do? That can be a huge challenge, you see. So being in a long-distance relationship doesn't mean that it can't work, or wanting to have it doesn't mean that it's automatic doom. It just requires a certain level of maturity and experience with yourself and willingness to be vulnerable and be open to the possibility. There are lots of things to love about it. There is the romantic notion of the reconnecting, which makes it great for a lot of people. And if that's what you're tuned to, then by all means, have at it, enjoy it, and see what it can bring to you. And with that, I'm going to close this episode with the thought that hopefully you are enjoying your relationships, and I'll try to keep thinking of things that we can talk about that make it relevant for you. So, I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and until next time, thank you for listening.